Good afternoon, everyone. I hope this mic's working. My name's Kay Anastasiadis, and I'm standing in for Priscilla Melisinaki, who's unfortunately ill today. She's the president of the Brit Museum of Adelaide, and I'm the secretary. So we're very. We hope Priscilla will get better very soon. So we've still got a few stragglers coming in, but we will get started. And we are on time, so just in case you think, because we made some sort of measure we took into account some Greek time, so, So just before we start, there are some housekeeping matters to note. Can you turn your phones to silent or turn them off while the speakers are talking and while the proceedings are occurring? The toilets are over there, through that door, and please note the emergency exits over here, and if the emergency alarm should sound, please line up and be calm and exit safely. I would like to acknowledge that we meet on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Adelaide Plains and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still important to the living Kaurna people today. And I think that has a certain amount of, this needs to be louder, no one can hear you.
Unfortunately, we cannot fix it better.
Is that better? Yes. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Don't want to swallow it. And I think that's got some alignment with this event in terms of the maintenance of culture and heritage for Greek people in South Australia and Australia. So I'd like to welcome everybody here today, and especially welcome our guest speakers and special guests. So I'm just going to quickly mention our special guests. The Consul General of Greece in Adelaide, Dr. Alexandra Theodoropoulos, coming and so we're very grateful to have you here today. Mayor Michael Coxon, member of City of West Torrens, is a major sponsor. I think hold your claps down for afterwards, please. Councillor George Dimitriou, our special guests, Dr. Helen Vatsikopoulos, Kay Pavlou, Emerita Professor Martha Augoustinos, Athena Lambetis from the Hellenic Studies Foundation, Dr. Andoni Fotopoulos, President of Festival Hellenika, Helen Holtis, President OEEGA, Father John Coraitis, Parish of Prophet Elias Norwood, the student prize winners who know who they are, but we're going to announce them much later on. We do have some apologies from Blair Boyer, MP, Minister for Education, Training and Skills, and State Member for Right, Andrea Michaels, MP, Minister for Small and Family Business SA, State Member for Enfield, Olivia Salas, MP, State Member for Newland. And we do have some apologies from, well, obviously from Priscilla and from Sophia Georgiou, who's unable to be here today as well, one of our board members. So, now I'm just going to give you a brief overview of how we're going to run this show today. This today is special for us because this is the South Australian launch of this wonderful book edited by Dr. Helen Vatsikopoulos called Hellenic Dreaming, Greek Australian Stories. We've got a few copies here, but we'll tell you more about how you can purchase them later on if you're interested. The Brit Museum of Adelaide is deeply honoured to host this launch and have Dr. Vatsikopoulos with us today. We'll hear from her about how this book came about, and how she engaged with the other 37 prominent Greek Australians, including two of our other panellists today. And then that's to be followed, so there'll be Helen and Martha Augoustinos and Kay Pavlou will talk about the book and have a discussion. Then we will have the announcement of the winners and for the Hellenic Dreaming High School Short Story Competition. And then a vote of thanks will be given by Athena Lambetis from the Hellenic Studies Foundation, a major sponsor of this event. We'll then wrap up and invite you for refreshments. I'd also like to thank all our sponsors. Hellenic Studies Foundation, first and foremost, the City of West Torrens for letting us use this wonderful space, Festival Hellenika and OEEGA for their support. This event would not have been possible without that generous help. So I think we now move on to introducing our presenters, especially Dr. Helen Vatsikopoulos. Helen is a Walkley Award-winning journalist and professional industry fellow in journalism and writing, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at the University of Technology, Sydney. And for today, she is the conceiver and editor of the book that's being launched today. We also have two of the South Australian contributors to the book, Emerita Professor of Psychology, Martha Augoustinos, who has over 39 years of service, and Kay Pavlou, an award-winning director of both documentary and drama. So this is really special. Hellenic Dreaming was first launched last year in Sydney in conjunction with the Greek Orthodox community of New South Wales. Sorry? Okay, hand over to Helen to move us into the next part of the proceedings.
Thank you very much, Kay, and thank you very much to the Greek Museum of Adelaide for this kind invitation. We launched Hellenic Dreaming last year in Sydney at the Greek Australian Writers Festival, which is an event that I direct, where we're trying to bring Greek authors, Greek Australian authors and Australian authors writing on Greek themes together. And then in October last year, we were invited by the Australian Embassy in Athens to present the book there. And that was really one of the highlights, I think, of my storytelling career, because we were able to present who we are as Greek Australians to the Greeks. And for someone who left Greece and came to Australia, to be able to then speak to the Greeks and tell them about who we are and what we've achieved and what we've suffered as well, was really quite a highlight. And what was really interesting is that there were diplomats in the audience, there were academics, there were also journalists, and a lot of them said, we had no idea. We thought you all went to Australia and you all made lots of money and you all lived in standalone houses and had lots of cars, and weren't you lucky? Well, they've learnt something different. It's much more complicated than that. And the most exciting thing about it was that there were a couple of publishers in the audience, and one of them I'm about to sign a contract with. The book is coming out in Greek in Greece, and that is really... So Hellenic Dreaming, how did it come about? The truth is, back in 2021, I was invited by the Greek Orthodox community of New South Wales as part of their festival to come up with an idea of celebrating 200 years of the start of Greek independence. And as a journalist, I thought, well, storytelling is the way to do it. Storytelling is incredibly powerful. Storytelling has a way of making people feel empathetic with people. So I thought, we'll do something on that. Then I thought about 1821, and I thought, how do we relate with 1821? Not at all. Maybe the Eureka Stockade, or maybe the Anzacs, or maybe lots of other things, but I'm not quite sure about 1821, because the truth is, everyone, we're not Greeks anymore, and we are actually hybrids. We are Greeks and Australians, and I thought, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to invite those who come from prominent Greek Australians, and there's two in the audience here today, and we'll have a discussion later. And we're going to talk about what is it that made us who we are today. So I invited 37 contributors, and these people are actually high-profile Greek Australians from creative industries. So we have film directors, we have professors of psychology, we have journalists, we have photographers, we have poets, we have people writing fiction, non-fiction, and I thought this is actually multidisciplinary, and this is a way that we can try and get a really good cross-section of who we are today. And the chief among them, of course, is someone that you would all know, George Megalogenis, who I think is the great explainer of who we are. And so George came on board, and with George I said, George, I'm going to pose a question to you. Are we white yet? Quite a controversial question. There were some people who said, you can't say that. You can't talk about whiteness. It's sort of... Anyway, well, we did, and we had a really good discussion. We even have a program that's on ABC Big Ideas called Are We White Yet? So the question was really... it's sort of two-pronged. It's a metaphor. White is a metaphor for for acceptance, for being part of the mainstream. But there's also an element of colour there. You all know the White Australia policy, and we think the Greeks, no, they weren't talking about us. But according to George, yes, they were. So George said, if you remember, the architect of the White Australia policy, who was a former Prime Minister, Edmund Barton, said, look, I'm not quite sure whether we should have the tinted people. So the yellow, the brown, and the copper coloured. He's left out olive, but I think we come under copper coloured, actually. So they should be forbidden to land anywhere. Yes, it was also about us. And he also went on to say, just in case people misunderstood, there is an Antipodean suspicion directed at immigrants of the lower Latin type, everybody. Yes. Not the higher, but the lower. So they were decidedly antagonistic towards newcomers from southeastern Europe. I think Greece is in southeastern Europe. So we don't escape this, right? So George wrote about this. Here we are trying to be everything, both things. That's Greek school. That's another story. I won't go into Greek school. So George wrote this piece in the book where he actually looked at his own life, and he went to school in the 70s, and George said, look, back then, of course, we, the Jewish kids, the Greek kids, the Italian kids were top of the class, because we had to be, otherwise we'd get into trouble from our parents if we didn't do that. They were top of the class and they were going somewhere. The Australian, Anglo kids were not top of the class. They were what he called sort of, normal achievement. It's not to say lesser intelligence, but lower achievement. And then many, many years later, when George was doing a program for the ABC and doing his analysis of who we are, he went back to the school to find out who's top of the class now. And guess what? The Greek kids were not top of the class anymore. They basically had gone back into sort of normal, like the other kids. Top of the class were the Vietnamese students and the Indian students, and the later arrivals whose parents just put so much emphasis on education and achievement. So when I say to George, are we white yet? He says, yes, we are. But it's not about colour, it's about class. Because, you know, we talk about colour, but we don't talk about class in Australia because we're an egalitarian society. Yes, maybe not. Class is a very important issue. And what happens is people like me, who was born in Greece, in a peasant culture, comes to Australia, joins the parents are working class now. I go to university, and lucky in Adelaide, I went to 2 universities when it was all free, but no more. And so I'm middle class. And so my kids are now middle class. And I can tell you, my kids are not top of the class. I taught at universities for 10 years and I was like, where's your high distinctions? And it's like, hey, whatever. So we've made it, we are white, but you know, we're not top of the class. So another chapter in the book, which is really interesting, is how when we first came to Australia, and I'm not talking about the post-war migrants, some of the earlier migrants, say in the 20s, how were they able to be accepted? And what happened back then is a lot of people anglicised their names. So you arrived in Australia and someone said to you, what's your name? Oh, you know, it's Vatsikopoulos. And oh, you can't have a name like that. And you know, you really need to change it to, I don't know, Smith, Jones, whatever. And a lot of these people did that. They'd shorten their names, they'd cut off the back, or they added something to the front, or completely anglicised their names so they could be accepted. So if you see this guy, so he was a, yes?
Would it be possible to switch the lights off above the screen?
Yes.
Yep, we'll do that. So this is Terry Cath. And some of you might remember the Mike Walsh show. So the Mike Walsh show, they used to have people coming to sing. And if you go to YouTube, you'll find Terry Cath singing Lady Love and other ballads. So Terry was Terry Cath. His younger brother, Phil Cath, became a journalist. And here he is with John Singleton. But actually his name is Phil Kafkaloutis. We all know him as Phil Kafkaloutis. So it's quite a hilarious article he writes about his uncle, I can't remember his name, Nick Manning. He said, I always thought my uncle Nick Manning was English. Really, Phil? Yeah, Manning. No, it was a very long Greek name, but when he arrived back in the 20s and 30s, people said, change that name. And so he became Manning. Now, Phil, bless him, married an Australian woman, and she said, what's this Cath business? You know, go back to Phil Kafkaloutis. And he did. And he hasn't looked back yet. So, now, another important part of this book is a series of articles that we call Tough Love. And those of us who came and we are the children of migrants, we know tough love very, very well. A lot of the time it was tougher than it was... Anyway. A gorgeous photograph by Emmanuel Angelicus, who has a whole series of photographs in this. So, you know, what happened to us as children of migrants? What were our experiences, and how did they define us, and how did they shape who we are? So one of those things that happened to us was, as children, we were really parents. So it's called the parentification of children. And I'm not going to talk about it right now because I'm sure Martha's going to talk about it, because Martha is Emeritus Professor of Psychology, and Martha will talk about that, and Martha's chapter introduces a lot of these concepts. And the other one, formophobia. So when you're a child of migrants, you're you're the one who has to fill in the forms. You're the one who has the whole neighbourhood lining up to say, what does this say? And you are all of 8 years old and you don't understand council talk, official talk, and you're going to get into trouble. Because why did I send you to school? You can't understand what is being said. So this is something that we went through, and I'm sure others are going through it. But it's something that resonates with me, because when the bills come in at home, I put them in a corner, and my husband says, "What are all these? They've got your name on them." "Oh, well, can you open them for me?" I still can't do it. It just I can't do it. Anyway, that's the trauma. Now, who remembers this woman? Okay, we all know this gorgeous woman who's from Adelaide, everyone. Chantal Conturi. And when I was about 12, there was a program on TV called Number 96, and then there was one called The Box, which we were never allowed to watch. But Chantal was on TV, and she was a real role model for people like myself, because I thought, there's a woman on Australian television who is Greek. Now, if she can do it, I can do it. If there wasn't anyone who is Greek, I would think it's an impossibility. So she was a real important influence. And so I contacted Chantal, who unfortunately is in Greece at the moment. She lives in Adelaide. And I got Mary Koustas, who's also a thespian, to do an interview with her to just discuss, how she made it, how she got into it, and what she said actually shocked me, because it was not a smooth ride for Chantal. Chantal, the story, which I cannot stop thinking about, when Chantal was 15 years of age, her mother said, "Be a good girl today, because there's a lady coming over and I want you to make a coffee for her." "Yes, Mum." So the lady came over, she made a coffee for her, and when the lady left, Chantal said, "Mum, who is that?" And she said, "That's going to be your mother-in-law." She's 15, okay? So, of course, she's about 15 years older than me. Hey, if I was 15 years older, it might have been me. I don't know. So what did Chantal do? Because she certainly succeeded in life and became a really famous actress. She ran away from home. Imagine running away from home at the age of 15 back then in the 70s. The community in Adelaide never let her forget it, which is something that's a stain on the community, I think. Anyway, so she went and became a dancer in Hindley Street. That wasn't good for the reputation either. And then she went to Melbourne and she joined Commotion. And then after that, she became an actor. And the really interesting thing that she writes about in her piece about forcing young girls to do things against their will is maternal compliance. A lot of the time, the mothers are the ones that run the house, Sorry, men, it's the women who run the house. Another beautiful photograph from Emmanuel Angelicus. This is his mother who passed away this year. Beautiful, beautiful photo. And what Chantal writes is, I saw this invisible suitcase full of village traditions that I had to abide by even though I lived in Australia. So many migrants brought a suitcase of village traditions with them and didn't really want to let them go. And this was quite a shock to the people in Athens who were listening to me. I'm like, really? What? Because we know that Greece just advanced, but a lot of things stood still in Australia for many, many years. But anyway, Chantal progressed, and the irony is, being on that beloved program, The Sullivans, she actually played a Greek woman in Crete who hid Tom Sullivan from the Nazis. And then, of course, the Nazis caught her and executed her. And she won a Logie Award for that. So I think, thank God you ran away. So I thought, that's in the past. Things have changed. Things have changed for young women today. Have they?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So, sorry. Okay, let's try again. Okay, so on the right is this lovely young woman who was a student of mine, who's a journalist at Channel 9 now in Sydney, Michaela Theocaris. And I gave her Chantel's story to read, and I said, read it, and then you write me your version of what it's like for you today. So she wrote this piece about her sessions with her psychologist, and how she had really significant problems in forming relations with young men. And I've met her mother, and her mother's wonderful. There's no sort of opposition there, there's no strictness. And she said there's certain things that we couldn't talk about, that she couldn't talk about. And her psychologist said this is called cultural trauma. It's called intergenerational trauma. It's something that gets carried on. And I thought, well, that's really, really interesting. Anyway, she's fine today. Lovely, lovely young woman. And then I went to one of my male students, and I said, Con, what's it like for you? So here we have Confessions of the Pampered Son. And it's very much, you know, his mother would say, you're a boy, sit down, what are you doing? Your sister's going to go and she's going to, you know, clean the table and do everything, you just sit down. So Con writes about this with a little bit of guilt, because now he has a beautiful daughter. And he's said to me, I'm going to make sure that my daughter doesn't, you know, she has equality with boys and everything. So there was some double standards there, I think we all know that. And then here's Kat Zam. Kat Zam is an award-winning, she's an artist, a photographer, and so, and of course she is gay. And so she wrote a piece about, yeah, we can be good Greek girls and we can also be gay. And so when she broke the news to her family, she said, oh, one of the comments was, what a waste of Greek eggs. And this is Peter Politis, who's an award-winning author. He's also gay, but his latest book was called God Forgets About the Poor, but it's about his mother, which is a beautiful book about his mother. And he also is a little bit conflicted about his identity, but he says, look, I'm gay, they just leave me alone. They leave me alone. And he writes about the push and pull of ethnic communities. We still want to maintain our heritage, our culture, our traditions, but at the same time we don't want them to strangle us. And that sounds like what's happening. He also writes about how mothers do still prefer boys. He's observed it. And then of course we have the lucky country, which is not meant in the sense that Donald Horne meant it, but I call it the lucky country because as my husband, who's Australian, says about my mum and dad, they won the lottery of life. They came to Australia and they have this fantastic life with a great social security net and good health care and good housing. And you know, you can maintain your traditions and you can dance in the backyard and it's wonderful. And the other amazing thing is about longevity. Did you know that Greek migrants live the longest of all of the migrants who come to Australia?
Oh, no.
It is true, it is true. The ABC's Dr. Norman Swan has actually written about it. And in terms of the whole world, I think they are the second longest surviving. And here's a man in his garden, and doesn't everybody have a garden? You have fresh fruit, you have fresh vegetables, and then of course you know, your houses reflect home. This is a photo by Efi Alexakis, a very well-known Greek Australian photographer. And we have a chapter called Diasporic Houses and Architecture by George Matsos. George is an architect. And George mounts an argument for preserving these. Because, you know, you see one of these houses and you buy it and you think, okay, bulldozer, or I'm going to take down that, I'm going to take down this. And he says, We should keep them because they are symbols of the success of the Greeks in Australia. This is their achievement. And of course, their children are their achievement. And the education that they couldn't have because of the war that their children had. This is a Greek school in Sydney. Could you fit any more kids in there? And then we have homelands. There's a whole chapter on homelands because it's really important for us to remember where we come from and where our parents come from and have some sort of association. And look, the last 3 years I've been going to Greece every year. Every year. It's like there's a pool and you almost want to go and find out more and more. So we had quite a few people writing about this. And so Eve Kogan is a young woman, she's 23, she's also a former student, and she is Greek Australian, almost third generation, and her maternal side comes from Limnos. Her paternal side is Australian, and she could trace it back to Limnos during the Gallipoli campaign. So if you see the photograph in the middle, that is from the time when Australian soldiers were in Gallipoli, were in Limnos before they set off to Gallipoli. And behind it is, of course, the cemetery with all the Australians are buried, and you can see it's the same, exactly the same location. So, you know, that Limnos has a very, very strong association with the Anzac campaign because that's where all the nurses were and where they would take all the injured. And then another former student of mine who works at Sky, Peter Augoustinos, whose family comes from Kalavrita, and he was going back to Kalavrita, and I said, I want you to think about your forebears and what happened in Kalavrita. And I think a lot of you will probably know that this was the site of one of the most horrendous Nazi massacres where all the boys and the men were taken up to a mountaintop and executed, and the women were put in a church that was about to be set on fire, but an Austrian soldier opened the door. Of course, he paid for it with his life. So this is a beautiful story about, wow, really thinking about who you are today and where you came from and what could have been. And then we have, of course, Pavlou's piece, My Divided Island Home, Cyprus. A beautiful piece about, last year, of course, was the 50th anniversary of the invasion, and it is something that should not be forgotten. And of course, Kay journeys in the story to her familial home, which is now occupied by Kurds, and you went to the, anyway, you can talk about it later. And of course, around us we have these, you know, beautiful costumes. And one of the projects in the book I did with Efi Alexakis, we wrote about costumes, and we wrote about the regional costumes. Well, I wrote about the costumes and also having to wear these costumes at Greek school while I was reading the poems, and also a little bit about, you know, the Amalia, which really was an invention of the queen. You forget that the Greeks had an imposed monarchy, and there was the Amalia, and part of the Tsoulia is sort of an invention. But anyway, so this is this young man wearing the Tsoulia outfit. His name is Perry. His father's Greek and his mother is Vietnamese. So this is the really interesting thing about the durability and the the strength of Greek culture, that you talk about generations later, and yes, he feels very, very proud wearing that. These two young women, their mother is Greek Cypriot, and the father is Indigenous Wiradjuri from New South Wales. So these girls, very, very comfortable in the costumes. At the same time, with Dad, they go to the smoking ceremonies and welcome to country. So again, here we have, you know, the merging of cultures. And of course, the question that we ask is, we talk about the strength of Greek culture, and we talk about its durability, and we're now really up to the 4th generation, I think. The question is, what happens when we get to the 5th, to the 6th, to the 7th? Are all those Greek community halls going to close down? Are we going to be so integrated, assimilated, that we won't have that sort of strength of culture? But the thing about the Greeks is we have festivals, we have events like this, and we can talk about it, and we have the Greek schools, because language, I think language is a key. Failed to get my kids to speak proper Greek. I tried, Greek schools, tutors, everything. Anyway, so just a couple of highlights from us in Athens. Alison Duncan is the Australian ambassador in Athens, and this woman is the Director General of Greeks Abroad. And we had a fantastic event. I also went to a few universities and talked about this, and again, we had no idea. We thought you were all rich and famous and happy and well adjusted. Anyway, so we're going to talk a little bit more now about some of the themes of the book. Yep. So I'd like to call Kay Pavlou to the stage. Kay Pavlou is an award-winning director of both documentary and drama. Unfinished yet. She's got a lot of achievements. Her drama work includes McLeod's Daughters, All Saints, The Killing of Angelo Tsakos. Documentary, she's worked on Who Do You Think You Are, Ghost Town, Back in Time for the Corner Shop, Race to London, and Family Confidential, Cyprus, A People Divided. Her latest documentary, you go and see it if you haven't, is Two Homelands. Through intimate interviews and rare archival material, the film examines the 1974 invasion of Cyprus and explores the themes of displacement, identity, resilience, and cultural legacy. Martha Augoustinos is Emerita Professor of Psychology at the University of Adelaide with a distinguished record of 39 years of service. Too many to mention research achievements in esteemed journals, and she's recognised nationally and internationally as a leading researcher in social psychology, advancing knowledge about the changing face of prejudice in Australia. She's currently working on an Australian Research Council funded project on life after settlement in refugee and migrant youth. Welcome. How's your microphone? Can you actually, if you put it really close to your, yeah. Okay, so Kay and Martha. So we had 3 South Australian contributors. Well, I count myself as a South Australian contributor. You're an SCP as well, living in Sydney. But Martha, of course, is here and has had a very distinguished career at Adelaide University. So let's start with you, Kay. So I say an SCP from South Australia. And you and I both worked in mainstream media, film, television, which back then was very white, very Anglo. And of course, you left Adelaide to go and work in Sydney. And who's Kay Paul?
Very good question. So my dear father is here. Augusto Bar. When we were growing up, we were christened in our birth certificates. I was Kay Paul. My father is Peter Paul, because in the 50s, when Dad arrived, Panagiotis Pavlou, a little bit difficult. So Dad anglicised it to Peter Paul, and I was Kay Paul. But then when I went to film school in Sydney, and I went to Sydney because at the time that was where I was going to learn my craft. So ironically, I left Adelaide to learn how to tell stories, but then I came back to tell the stories of my family and my community. But I had to run away in order to come back, because if I hadn't, I wouldn't be telling the stories. And once I got there, I thought, I don't look very Greek, and my name is Kay Paul, so I went, Kay Pavlou, I'm going to take my name back. And people then started saying, Kay Pavlou, that's not very Greek. What's the long version? And I go, well, Pavlou's the full thing, but Kay's short for Kyriakoulis. But I tried Kyriakoulis for a while, and then it was hopeless. People used to call me the artist formerly known as Kay. So for anyone who's a Prince fan, that's, no one could remember it. So I had to leave in order to, because like you say, I wanted to learn the craft of storytelling so I could tell our stories. Along the way I told lots of other stories. But I had a part of my career where I was really interested in ancestral stories, not just the Greeks. I did Who Do You Think You Are? 12 episodes of that, which took me all around the world. Jewish stories, indigenous stories. I ended up in Moscow, Belarus, the Tower of London, where ancestors were beheaded by Henry VIII. So I went deep into history, and then I still wanted to tell the Cypriot story, because let's face it, the Cypriot story, it's a tragic story, and you keep coming back to it. I keep coming back to it, the Cyprus problem. And so last year when it was, this is a long answer.
Oh, we will talk about it.
Shall I talk about that later?
Yeah.
Dora?
No, I'll ask you a specific question.
Okay, so I'm going to hand back that's Kay Paul left Adelaide, came back as Kay Pavlou.
Well, in terms of the name, I just have to say that when I was a student here at McGill doing journalism and I had to do a placement somewhere, I remember the editor of the newspaper there saying to me, now listen here, if you want to make it in journalism, you're going to have to do something about that name. You're really going to have to change it. And and that really distressed me deeply, but I didn't, and I'm so glad I didn't, because I watch American television. There's George Stephanopoulos, and if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. And also, I did, but then I didn't want to be typecast, and I didn't want to. So it was very, very difficult anyway. But Martha, you didn't change your name, so tell me.
Well, I never left Adelaide. I'm still stuck here. I often wished I had escaped, but never did, never had the courage, because, of course, my parents instilled in me from a very young age that it is, how did they put it? It is the worst thing in the world to leave your home and to leave your family and your parents. And I think for me that was a real kind of obstacle, I suppose, but I've never had any real regrets, I must say, lived a pretty joyful life here in Adelaide, I suppose, but who knows what could have been if I had escaped. But I never changed my name. My name was who I was, even though I used to get teased a lot at school. People used to call me September, as in, August, September, Mum, September. It took me a while for the penny to drop for me, that I was only very little then. But of course I did have an opportunity to change my name when I married my husband. And there were two reasons why I didn't change my name. One was the feminist pledge that I was not going to take on the name of a husband. I was going to maintain my identity. But also I didn't want to lose that, that ethnic kind of cultural glue there. I wanted that. I always viewed myself as a Greek Australian, and I wanted my name to be part of who I was. And of course, really, the real reason is I didn't want to be Taylor, Martha Taylor. I mean, what a boring name, Taylor, right? I mean, no one would ask me questions about a name like that. I mean, a very common, boring, banal English name. No. That's why I can say these things about him. He's in Sydney at the moment. But he agrees. Anyway, so I kept my name, but I have another interesting story about the name, because it has caused me a lot of problems over these. How do you spell that? How do you pronounce that? On and on and on, right? But you get used to it. But an interesting story was one day my son, who was maybe 14 at the time, he came to my office at the University of Adelaide after school, and he was in a school uniform, and he brought a friend with him. And of course there was my name on the door, you know, Professor Martha Augoustinos, and his friend turned to him, a boy that I knew who'd come to our house dozens of times, and turned to my son and said, "I didn't know your mother was a wog." Of course his surname is Taylor, right? And so Dylan, my son, was told me this. He was in shock. He said, "You know what? You know, my friend said." He said, "Called you a wog." And I said, "Well, let that be a lesson to you, because that's what people would have called you if you had my surname or another Greek-sounding name." And that was part of our experience growing up, I guess, I think wasn't really quite a multicultural society at the time in the 1960s, but certainly, you know, the name was a real strong identifier, and still is. And I must admit my own guilt for not being able to pronounce some of those Sri Lankan names of students, which are even longer than Greek names, if that's possible, right? And you know, other kind of names from the subcontinent.
And Polish names.
Oh, Polish names! Don't get me started. Yes, I know. Yes.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, do you remember there was an ad, I know it was when I was growing up and at school, and this clearly a Greek guy with a big moustache went to the bank to open an account, and they said, "What is your name?" And he said, "My name is Con Papadopoulos." Do you remember that? Oh, it was a famous ad, and of course, when I went to school the next day, guess what I was called? So it's just one of those things, you know. But look, so Martha, I'm just going to go back to you now, because your chapter that was very, very interesting about you know, the parentification of children, homophobia, and all of those sort of psychological impacts of being the children of migrants. I know you're doing a study at the moment. We'll talk about that later, but just talk through some of the things that you mentioned in your chapter.
When I refer to the parentification of children, we were given incredible responsibilities. I think everyone can identify with that. When we were very young, our parents, as Helen pointed out, were basically agrarian, you know, peasants. And when they came to Australia, they became factory workers, and we were very working class. In fact, I grew up here in this area. I went to Cowandilla Demonstration School just down the road. I lived in Myland, as did a lot of Greeks at the time. Some of my cousins and aunts and uncles lived in that community. We had lots of neighbours who were Greek. And I've lost my train of thought now. What was that? Parentification, right.
Yeah.
So Mum and Dad would go off to work to the factory, to Chrysler, which was a long way from here. So I don't know how many buses they had to catch, or they walked and caught, you know, different buses and what have you to get there. And I mean, we were latchkey kids, right? And you know, you think about all those, you know, child welfare laws today, right? Oh my God, right? We would have been, you know, basically taken away from our parents because there was nobody at home. I was 5 years old and I had to take myself to school. Mum would get up and Dad would get up at, I don't know, really early in the morning. They'd make me breakfast and they'd force it down my throat and make sure to eat it, that I would eat it, because I wasn't a big eater. And I'd have to, you know, wait a couple of hours before I'd walk myself to school. I'd go back home and there was no one home. You know, I'd had to wait till they got home. And could I just put on the TV? No, we didn't have TV, you know, in the early days. But I had to cook dinner, right? You know, there was no playing out in the streets like the boys were allowed to do. You know, I had to put the, you know, fasolada on, or whatever it was that we were cooking that night. And so, you know, we were taught to do things from a very young age. We were given responsibilities, adult responsibilities. And my sister is here. She was born 6 years after me. I had to look after her too when she came along. Yeah, so I was 6 years old, and Mum didn't take a lot of time off from work, and so, you know, there was all that kind of, and my sister too, she well, actually, no, she got away with murder. It's always the oldest, right, who has to do, you know, the stuff. The form filling, oh my God, you know, I was known at uni as, you know, the professor who never got her bureaucratic work done on time. Martha, where's your form? You didn't fill this out. And of course, as the years, you know, the last few years at university, the increasing bureaucracy and administrative load was unbelievable. You know, basically your job was form filling the whole time. You know, teaching was, you know, a mere kind of, you know, pastime. And research, well, forget about that because there's no time for that either. And I hated filling out forms. I still to this very day, like Helen, I cannot fill out a form, which is ridiculous. I have a PhD, right? But it was an anxiety because as children, we had to do all of that paperwork for not just our parents, but as you said, for relatives, extended family. And here I have to give credit to my older cousin, Angela, who couldn't be here today. And she, of course, would do that before I was able to do that at the age of 4 or 5 or whatever it was. So yeah, the anxiety of getting it right and filling out things and trying to decipher bureaucratic forms at a very young age, it was a big responsibility. But actually, just on a positive note, because it wasn't all bad, it really made us who we are and were, right? I think without that kind of upbringing, we wouldn't have developed some of the resilience that many of us have today. Not like our mollycoddled children.
What about you, Kate? Formophobia? No?
Well, I didn't because my father, because we're Cypriots, it was a British colony when they left. Okay? So there was some knowledge of English which varied according to, my father finished high school and worked as a clerk for the British.
So he could fill out his own forms.
Dad could fill out his own forms. Yeah. He was filling out the forms for other Cypriots, for other Cypriots. So I didn't have to do that. No, different kinds of pluses and minuses. But yeah, we grew up, former colonial subjects.
So the piece in Chantal's story is something that really resonated with me, and also the difference between the life of the boys and the girls. I'm an only child, so I didn't have a brother. You had a sister. Sisters, so we didn't have boys, but we certainly had cousins, didn't we? Is there this sort of simmering little bit resentment that we have about the fact that, gee, the boys have it so easy? Do we have that?
I'll let Kay answer.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons I left Adelaide, was to be freer of, you know, I didn't want to hurt my parents, but I also didn't want to just restrict my life experience. And yeah, it was different between the boys and the girls. We were 2 girls, you know, but I think it's different, not just for Greeks. It's why I'm a feminist. It's the difference between men and women, which is still, although we're supposedly, you know, post-feminist, whatever that means, there's still a very big difference, although of course there's more equality and opportunity for women. So it's not just within the Greek or Cypriot community.
I think one of the things I might have said in the piece was that I'm not sure, and this is, you know, I'm not wanting to cast aspersions or, you know, be negative about my parents, but I'm kind of glad that we, you know, both my sister and I, that we didn't have a brother, because our lives may have turned out very different if we did, based on our, you know, observations. I do have a male cousin here. So, of what was going on in our extended family. So, and I think my father, I mean, both my parents valued education, but I think my father in particular invested so much in me and, you know, really impressing upon me the importance of education and me succeeding and achieving. But I wonder if there was a son, whether the focus would have been in, you know, on me or in me rather than, you know, on the son, you know, that all their energies would have gone there rather than with my sister and I.
It's a very good point, actually. One slight observation I want to make is that the three of us, husbands and partners, are not Greek. Is that confession? Is that some deep psychological reason that I'm no. Yeah. Can I? You know,
I've been
you're a
thinking.
psychologist.
Yes, I know. I've thought a lot about that throughout my life. And of course, my parents were devastated that I didn't marry a Greek, a Greek. Although they love him more than me, I can tell you, they, you know, do anything for him, but me, oh no, if there's any problem, it's my fault, not his fault. He's an angel, you know, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, and he has been incredibly, you know, wonderful with our family, to our family. Again, I've lost my train of thought. Oh yes, why did I marry him? Many reasons, but I never thought I would marry a Greek guy because I had lots of male Greek friends. I mean, I went to an all-girls school, so I didn't really have, you know, a lot of contact, I guess, with Greek males other than my cousins and, you know, extended friends of the family. But I think the other reason was that a lot of the Greek boys, and I did like some of the Greek boys. You know, I had you know, crushes on quite a few of them when we used to go to dances and what have you. They weren't interested in me, right? Because
You're too smart.
I wasn't. Yeah, I wasn't the kind of quiet, subdued, you know, Greek girl, good Greek girl. Yeah, and so, you know, I think if there had been someone out there who wanted a feisty, argumentative, you know, Greek wife, then, you know, things may have turned out as it, you know, happened. It was Dave who was attracted to all my wonderful traits, you know, some of them being very Greek in character.
Well, yeah, and sometimes I think, my partner's name is Jack, and I go sometimes to say something to Jack in Greek, because, you know, that's what you do. Try and have these little conversations that no one can understand, and I think, oh, I can't speak Greek. So I would have loved a partner or a husband in life that could speak Greek, but you just can't, you know, you fall in love with whomever you fall in love with, and there are lots of qualities in Jack, and yeah, Dad loves him. Can't wait to talk to Jack on the phone. Is Jack there? Yeah, okay.
And also, yes, so I married Mark, and of course my parents absolutely adored. My mum's here. You love Mark, I know you do. And very interesting thing about Mark is that at one stage, we both went to Greece, and I had to return back for work. He went on to the village. He went on to our village, which is Prespa, up in the mountains by the border. He doesn't speak Greek. My family in the village did not speak English. But he went there, and through sign language, and I don't know what, he stayed there for about a week. And he even went out to the mountain with my uncle, who was a shepherd. So I got up at 2 in the morning and went out with a provada and said, wow, this is amazing, and I loved it. And your uncle told me all about where, because that's the border, and you walk up to the top of the mountain and you see North Macedonia. Back then I think it was Yugoslavia, I think, and you look down, you go, yeah, there's another country, and over there's Albania, and of course you say, yes, your uncle told me all about the trenches, because of the First World War and the Balkan Wars, and I thought, how did he tell you that? Well, he just pointed it and whatever. So, you don't have to speak the language. It's a universal language of love. So, Kay, and we're going to talk about your chapter now, Kay. Cyprus. Now, I loved in your piece the first line, which was something like, I keep finding myself going to the Cypriot club more often than I've ever had before. Because as we get older, we are embracing the past. We ran away from it on stage, and now we're embracing it. But of course, there's a particular reason in your passion for history and the trauma that Cyprus has endured. So tell us a little bit about that and what you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, Igipre, we are Greek speakers, we are Greeks, but we have very different history to Greece. And like I said, my parents grew up with the British, and then there was the Republic, and then there was the invasion. So every time I want to go back to my family story, I have to confront somehow the tragedy of Cyprus. We come from the north, the most northern village, the most occupied village, Rizogatapaso, and Sophie's here from Rizogatapaso, Diamanti, and her sister Mary at the back. There's a few other Gibrei here as well, from different parts of Cyprus. But so as a storyteller, I kept going back, and for a long time we could just go to the border, because it was a closed border. I've made 3 films now about Cyprus. I wanted to make another one, but the story, I wanted to make a dysfunctional family comedy set in an occupied village. It was a great script. It was a really great script. Because how do you make comedy about tragedy? But now it's just become just too hard to make art house films. So what I did last year was, it was the 50th commemoration of the Cypriot War. I called it the Cypriot War because it's not just Turkish invasion. There was a whole lot of complexity about the Greek junta being involved from Greece. Anyway, without going into that, because Cypriots love to talk about the Cyprus problem, but I had to find a way to tell it. So I told it from the point of view of the diaspora. My parents' generation, they came here. They always dreamed of the homeland, then the homeland was taken. So we have a complicated relationship to our ancestral home. At the moment, the last few years ago, I went to my dad's village. No one had knocked on the door for a long time because the family had moved in. And my cousin said, don't do anything stupid. And I said, look, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a journalist, I know how to treat people. I'm not going to go, get out of our house. But the people who answered the door, he was Kurdish, he is Kurdish, he's married a Turkish woman. The Kurdish man was born in Rizogatapaso. He feels Cypriot. They've taken my father's home, where 9 children, my grandfather built it with his own hands. 9 children were born and bred there. And these people said, we've been waiting for you. And I went, oh, yeah, right, great. Do you like coffee? They were so friendly. And they gave me an envelope, which they'd found in the house when my uncle died. Because my uncle was one of the Inglovis men, which means he didn't leave when the Turks came. He lived there for 40 years until he died. He kept some of the family stuff in the house, and it was an envelope with a photo of my father from 1951. He'd taken it in Adelaide, sent it back to the village, and my uncle had kept it underneath the house all that time. So there I was, in my own episode of Who Do You Think You Are, except there were no cameras. Although I was ready for my close-up. And these are the stories. These are our stories. And how do you tell them? And that's one of the stories I've put in Hellenic Dreaming. Dad's here tonight. this afternoon. So when you look at what's happening in the Middle East at the moment, it's unspeakable genocide. The Cyprus problem doesn't compare. Cyprus is doing incredibly well in the south. The north, I just read a book by an author called Alex Christofi. He's a Cypriot from the UK. His book is Cypriot. His last line is, "The past is a powerful place, but for us to survive and to move on, we have to leave some of it in the ground where it belongs." So we go back to the past, we visit, we tell it, we make films, we tell stories, and we have to move on. But lest we forget.
Okay, that's the power of storytelling, absolutely. So Martha, you're working at the moment on an Australian Research Council funded project on life after settlement in refugee and migrant youth. So we're talking about refugee and migrant youth today, but it could very well have been back in the day. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing, and also how do some of their experiences compare or similar to what the Greeks went through when they first came?
Yes, we've interviewed hundreds of recent young people who, recent migrants and all refugees. And I was listening to the interviews. We had to transcribe them sometimes because the English was still, developing. We did one-on-one interviews, but also focus groups, which were really kind of interesting because then you see the sort of dynamics of young people talking to each other and bouncing off each other. And really the stories were just so identified so strongly with them because they were very similar. And one of the things that, of course, we're really interested in is their psychological well-being and their adjustment and, how well they're doing during settlement. And they speak of similar sorts of issues that we went through in terms of learning. Language is just so critical. Learning English and the difficulties in learning English and how that to them is like, number one priority. And it really spoke to me because when I started school just down the road here, I couldn't speak English. I was raised in a Greek-speaking home. This was before television was, in everybody's, home in 1964 or 5. I was so excited about going to school, starting school. And, but I couldn't, I didn't speak the language when I started. And it really affected my experience of school. And I found it really aversive. I had a really horrible teacher. I can't remember her name, must have repressed her, but she, and then I tell the story about how, as a form of punishment to me, and I can't even remember what it was that I, did wrong, probably just not being able to say a word or write a word or whatever it was. She used to make me sit next to Kingsley, this little boy called Kingsley, who was this little, Australian boy who was so poor he would come to school with no shoes on. And of course, and he was all dishevelled and dirty with snot running down his, face. And of course, I was humiliated, having to sit next to Kingsley. But, it's only when I got older that I wondered how poor old Kingsley felt, having to sit there and be the punishment for other children. But anyway, and that was schooling in 1965, and things did change very quickly soon afterwards. And here I am telling my own story, but I have to tell you this bit, right? Because I actually wagged school. at the age of 5. My sister will tell you. I stayed home. My parents didn't know, right? They had no idea because they'd go off to work in the morning. They'd make the sandwiches and say, right, and they'd come home. How was school? Yeah, great, you know. And I think it was about 6 weeks. And the school did not contact my parents. They did not contact my family, my parents. We didn't have a phone anyway, but you know, you'd think these days the school would not, you know, would not go unnoticed that the WOG girl wasn't turning up to school, right? Anyway, and it was a neighbour down the street who said to my parents, has Mother been sick? And Mum said, no, why? Well, we haven't seen her, you know, walking to school, walking to and from school. And so my parents came home, and you can imagine what happened. And my cousin, who was older, she went down to the school and had a big chat to them, and you know, my parents had a chat to, you know, in the only way they could with the principal at the time. But I remember thinking at the time, and of course a lot of the stories of these recently arrived kids reminds me of, you know, their sort of desperation to master the language. Because I remember as a 5-year-old thinking, I have to bloody master this language, otherwise I am not going to survive. I will not survive. And again, that's what made me. I often jokingly say in a very, you know, self-deprecating way, you know, when people say, how did you manage to become a professor? You know, how you know, an academic, you know, Greek Australian. I said, because I never left school. You know, I made school my, you know, ambition. It was like how to master school and how to be good at school. And a lot of these kids talk about this, education being really important, the stresses of having to interpret for their parents, the form filling, the responsibilities that they're given, especially the girls, of course. So the gender stuff is very similar as well. These kids come from Afghanistan, from Sudan, from Sri Lanka, from all parts of the world, India, and their experiences, their anxieties, their fears, their ambitions are very, very similar to what we sort of went through in our day. So I don't think it's a unique experience. It's a shared one for migrants, and I imagine for refugees it's compounded by other sorts of issues around trauma and dislocation. Did you want to say something about that? Or?
No, just about Two Homelands. I made a film last year called Two Homelands, which is specifically around the commemoration of Cyprus and the war, but it is about migration as well, and the journey of migrants, and then the two homelands, the diaspora that has a home here and a home in Europe, and that becomes a common experience. You called it hybrid, and for those of you who haven't seen it, it will be on probably in the Greek Film Festival in October here in Adelaide, which will be from mid-October to end of October. Have no dates yet, but it'll be on as part of the festival, and then after it'll be on SBS as well. Because I tried to make it's about us, but it's also common to migrants. Yeah, a little bit different for migrants who've come. You know, the business about being white, we may be white, but we didn't colonise this place. We didn't come with that kind of advantage. We've got, and I'm not complaining because we live a good life now, but there is that psyche that it's in Two Homelands.
Can I just comment about being white? Now, I know they say that white people don't think about race and their racial identity because they assume that they're the norm, right? Or Australians anyway, Australian, people. But I never thought myself as white. I really didn't. Because someone asked me that like years later, and I said, I don't know if I'm white, because I don't think I was perceived as white. right? And I always thought myself, again in the interview that we had with Helen, it was my father who told me at the age of 10, 10 to age of 12, when I said something to him about being Greek, I'm Greek. And he said, "You're not Greek. You're Australian. You were born here." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yes, you are Australian. You are not Greek." And for me, that still does not ring true to me, actually. I've always thought that hybrid identity, Greek, Australian, for me, that's what I feel most comfortable with. But, it's very complex and it's very nuanced, and it does also change, and it's very flexible, and it fluctuates from context to context and situation to situation, in terms of your identity and how you feel. So, it's like my father and mother often used to say when they're here, they're Greek, but when they're in Greece, they feel Australian, right? And they're even called Australian by their family. Yes, but I need thanks so much.
We're Olive.
Does anybody want to ask questions? Are there any questions? If not, we'll move to the next part of the proceedings. Okay. Okay, I think we've been very good. Thank you very much. Okay, so one of the discussions, of course, is what happens after the fourth generation, the fifth generation, and how do we keep this sort of Greek identity going? So we decided, the Greek Museum of Adelaide, and sorry, I didn't write this, so I'll get to, so a competition was held in conjunction with today, and it was developed. We asked the question, what does it mean to be Greek Australian in the third and fourth generations, and what role does the Greek language play in the continuation of Greek culture and identity for young people today? And thank you to the generous sponsorship of the Hellenic Studies Foundation, we have prizes for the award-winning students. So the museum engaged students from Greek Australian backgrounds through the Greek schools, the Greek teachers, the Modern Greek Language Teachers Association of South Australia, and then we had 3 judges. I was one of them. Essia Threen, well-known Modern Greek Language teacher, and Kostas Fotiadis, nominated by the Greek Studies Foundation. So, and we judged the entries, and they were fascinating. And we have the winners here today, and I'm going to announce the winners, okay? So, when you hear your name, please come up. We didn't know who was writing. They were anonymous, but it gives me great pleasure to announce the winners. We had a special category prize for a student who was either a first or second generation Australian, either born in Greece or in Australia after their parents' migration. And the winner is Nikolaos Triandafilou. Nikolaos is a Year 11 student attending Charles Campbell College. His teacher is Aleka Papakostas. He was born in Greece and arrived in Australia in 2023. Wow. And congratulations. So, the third prize goes to Yanis Thanos, who's a Year 9 Adelaide High School student, attends the Greek Orthodox community of South Australia School. His Greek teachers are Rozakli and Thomai. And Yanis wrote about the value of various Greek communities and creating sustaining Greek culture. We have 2 equal second category prize winners. because I couldn't decide who. So the first is Sophia Skoumbros. Sophia is a Year 10 student and attends the Greek Orthodox community of South Australia. Her teacher is Chrysoula. Sophia is here. Okay, great. The other second prize winner is Frank Lambetis, Year 8 student at Morialta Secondary School. Congratulations to all of them. And now the first prize winner, Mariah Palaxoglu. Mariah. Mariah is a Year 8 student at Brighton Secondary School, attends St George Ethnic School on Saturdays to learn Greek. She spent her early childhood immersed in Greek language. Now here's something really interesting. So Mariah, you and I have a lot in common. Because when we started school, neither of us could speak Greek. English. But Mariah was actually born in Australia. Yes, I'm sure Martha will have something to say about this later. Congratulations, as part of your prize, a cash prize and 2 airline tickets for you and your one parent, to visit the Hellenic Museum in Melbourne, with accommodation, meals, travel, etc., and a copy of our book. And you're going to be in the Greek edition. All those students can say, how come she couldn't speak English when she started school? So you're going to read out your essay out to us and tell us how this happened, how this phenomenon happened.
Το όνομά μου είναι Μαρία Παλαξόγλου και είμαι 13 χρονών. Πάω σχολείο στο Brighton Secondary School στην 8η τάξη. Είμαι τρίτης γενιάς Ελληνίδα και θα σας πω την εμπειρία μου και πώς η ελληνική γλώσσα συνέχεται για τις νεότερες γενιές. Οι παππούδες και οι γιαγιάδες μου γεννήθηκαν στην Ελλάδα, εκτός από τον παπά του παπά μου, που γεννήθηκε στην Νότιο Αυστραλία, αλλά έχει Ελληνές γονείς. Ήταν 8 όταν πήγε στην Ελλάδα και έμεινε εκεί για 10 χρόνια, πριν ήρθε στην Αυστραλία, όταν ήταν 18 χρονών. Η μαμά γεννήθηκε στην Αρκαδία και της μαμάς μου ο μπαμπάς γεννήθηκε στην Βόρεια Ηλία. Του μπαμπά μου η μητέρα γεννήθηκε στην Αθήνα και έμεινε εκεί μέχρι όταν ήταν 19 χρονών και τότε ήρθε να μένει στην Αυστραλία. Οι γονείς μου γεννήθηκαν στην Adelaide, Νότιο Αυστραλία. My name is Mariah Palaxoglu and I'm 13 years old and Year 8 at Brighton Secondary School. I'm third generation Greek and I'm going to be describing what it is like to be third generation Greek in my experience and how the Greek language continues for the Greek culture for younger generations. My grandparents were born in Greece except for my paternal grandfather who was born in South Australia to Greek parents. He was 8 years old when he went to Greece and he lived there for 10 years and returned to Australia when he was 18. My maternal grandmother was born in Arcadia and my maternal grandfather was born in North Ilias. My paternal grandmother was born in Athens and she lived there until she was 19 and then came to live in Australia. Both my parents were born in Adelaide, South Australia. My parents are predominantly English speaking, but it was important to them for me and my brother to learn Greek, and therefore they only spoke Greek to us in the first 4 years of life, up until we went to kindergarten when we were first exposed to the English language. I remember struggling to understand the educators and the children speaking English, as I had rarely heard the language before. My parents felt slightly guilty at this point that I wasn't exposed to the English language sooner, as I couldn't understand even basic communication in English. Lucky my mum was by my side in the first few weeks to be able to translate for me, though I picked things up quickly myself too. You see, we were only ever looked after by our grandparents up until school, and family and friends would only interact with us in Greek. In the first 4 years of life, we could only speak Greek, and I even remember anything we watched on TV was only Greek. This was because my parents would put on all the Disney movies, and even the Peppa Pig series was viewed by us in Greek. The theme song was quite funny in Greek. Further memories include eating my great-grandmother's spanakopita, spinach pie, and learning how to light the kadili, religious lantern. She also taught me how to listen in church from a young age and how to stand in church, and was teaching me what seemed like a foreign language. I remember winning the genuine footy gold coin on New Year's Day in a vasilopita, New Year's Day cake that my grandmother made. I have the memory of going to my grandparents' house and walking into the next door property's backyard that was made up of a garden full of produce ready to harvest. You know you're a great grandchild when your grandpa gives you a mandarin tree for your birthday. I used to love learning so many Greek swear words and gestures when in the car with grandparents. This reminds me of when we went to Greece in 2023 for the first time when I was 12, and hearing the Greek swear words that we used in people's daily communication, which shocked me, although I remembered them from my grandparents too. On this trip, I travelled with my parents, brother, grandparents, from my mum and dad's side, my auntie, uncle, little cousin, and great-grandmother. I stayed there for nearly 8 weeks and visited where my grandparents' heritage is from, including Athens, Kefalonia, and Amaliada. I loved it there, and as soon as I walked through the doors of the Athens airport, it felt like home and familiar, even though I had never been there before. I recognised the feeling of belonging as the airport staff spoke the Greek language, and this was familiar to me from my family talking Greek. I loved being in Greece and remember crying because I didn't want to leave. I loved getting to experience the wonderful places and going to the Parthenon. But my favourite part was staying in Kefalonia and having pagotinia, mini ice creams from the Foodno bakery next door, and the daily visits to the Loudas beach on a hot summer's day. I went to a Panagiri in Greece, which was on my name day, also known as Panagias, which is one of the biggest name days in Greece. It's amazing that everything stops in Greece on this day, yet here in Australia, I go to school on my name day and nobody even knows. I used to learn Greek dancing on Sundays at Pan-Hellenic Dance School when I was 5, and my brother joined me when he was 2.5. We used to dress up in the traditional costumes every month and perform at festivals and nursing homes. I remember at performances, my brother wore a nappy underneath his fustanella, traditional male costume, and my parents would remove his dummy from his mouth before he went on stage. This has been very useful to join in the dancing celebrations at weddings, festivals and parties. Additionally, my father plays bouzouki, Greek instrument, and through this experience I am familiar with the Greek music. I also attend Greek school every Saturday morning for 3 hours. I argue about going, but I know if I want to be able to be fluent in Greek, I have to go there to learn. I have been going there since I was in year 3, and in the previous years my grandmother, who is a Greek university lecturer, convinced my parents that she would teach me Greek instead of going to Greek school. As you can imagine, I learned very quickly to also convince my grandmother that I had learnt enough after 15 minutes of homeschool. This was not going to be enough to match my peers' development. I even find that now my spoken and translated Greek is more advanced than my reading and writing of Greek for my age. I still have a lot to learn. I want to continue learning Greek for a couple of reasons. My grandfather can only speak Greek and struggles with English, so I want to be able to speak Greek fluently so I can continue communicating with him. Another reason why I want to be very fluent in Greek is so when we go to Greece and we visit my relatives, I can communicate with them too and understand every word they're saying to me. I do speak Greek at home with my parents, though not every word in Greek, and some words I only know in Greek like fasolada. There are only a couple things I dislike about being Greek, like going to Greek school every Saturday. But in the end, I know it's worth it because I'm learning how to be fluent in Greek so I can keep the language alive and know my culture. The other thing I dislike is that my parents are strict, probably the result of their parents being strict with them from immigrating from a foreign country. But I know they're only being strict to protect me from danger, which is helpful even though it is a bit annoying. There are so many things I like about being Greek, such as when we are in public and I need to say something to my family in Greek that I don't want others to hear, I would say it in Greek. I loved when one time my grandfather brought home 2 baby goats to look after. I also have the memory at 2.5 sitting on the kitchen bench with my grandmother and making Greek food and dyeing red eggs for Easter. My great-grandmother would show me how to embroider delicate pieces which she has given to my mum and will be passed on to me one day. In answering the second question, what role does Greek language play in the continuation of Greek culture and identity for young people in South Australia today? I think it is important to know and use the Greek language because through language, future generations can learn about Greek history and culture. There is also a rich tradition of art, theatre and dance in Greek culture. Language is not just sentence structure and grammar. Written and spoken words are a way of values and traditions to be passed on to each generation. As with my personal experience above, it is clear that through my connection with Greek-speaking grandparents and parents, I have learnt so much about Greek culture and created my identity, which connects me to my ancestors and heritage. With this, I am proud to say that my identity is being Greek-Australian. Therefore, I have 2 identities meshed in one. I also want to create these 2 identities for my children in the future. I will probably do this in a similar way that my parents have done, that is to use the Greek language as the main foundation to help form their identity too. I also want them to feel like Greece is their second home, and through language, I also want to pass down the myths and historical accounts that my grandparents gave me. This will help shape how my children and younger generations understand and interact with the world. The Greek language has also been preserved and promoted by festivals in Adelaide and through relatives and families who have been speaking Greek to us from a very young age. Also, some other benefits of the Greek language continuing is that learning a second language challenges and strengthens the brain in many ways. For example, studies suggest that bilingual children tend to perform better in tasks requiring memory and problem solving and critical thinking. Greek is also the base of many English words, particularly in fields like science, medicine and philosophy, which makes Greek an excellent academic asset. Language provides a pathway of communicating in society about Greek education. For example, I think knowing how to speak the Greek language is important for future careers, such as being a Greek school teacher in Australia or another country. Finally, the Greek Museum of Adelaide is so valuable in also promoting and preserving Greek culture in Australia for its information and collections, which will encourage knowledge, education for the younger generations as the museum will be visited by schools. In conclusion, most would agree that heritage helps to form the individual's identity. I am extremely proud to be raised in such a rich culture of being Greek and how it has shaped me. Language is used to express values, beliefs and customs to differentiate one culture from another, and this can be a source of pride and identity for young people as it is for myself. The ability to speak Greek with others can create a shared community and a sense of belonging. When a language is lost, part of that culture is lost. And this is why we want to keep our Greek culture alive, because when the language is preserved, the traditions and customs continue living on. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're nearly at the end of our proceedings, but I do want to thank Dr. Helen Vatsikopoulos, Emerita Professor Martha Augoustinos, and Kay Pavlou. That was just an amazing session. I don't know how you feel, but I certainly saw so much of my own childhood in what they were saying. And I'd also like to thank so we're really honoured to have heard from you all today. I mean, it was great. And I wish to thank the judges and congratulate the prize-winning students and all the students who participated in the competition. So we've now got a vote of thanks from Athena Lambetis, who's on the board of Hellenic Studies Foundation, and she's here representing the foundation to give a vote of thanks. Thank you.
Consul General May Coxon, Councillor Dimitrio, distinguished guests, family and friends. I'm honoured to be here with you all today on behalf of the Hellenic Studies Foundation and the chair of our board, Greg Crafter. I'm delighted to give a vote of thanks to Dr. Helen Vatsikopoulos as the editor and creative genius who came up with the idea, and Kay Pavlou and Emerita Professor Martha Augoustinos, who are two of the 37 contributors to the book Hellenic Dreaming, Greek Australian Stories. What is particularly wonderful is that these three women are South Australians who have made massively significant contributions to both the Australian and South Australian communities. So congratulations. This is an important book. Associate Professor Nicholas Doumanis, who has established the Greek Australian Archive, supported by the University of New South Wales and Social Sciences, points out that the generation of Greeks that came to Australia in the 50s and 60s is fast disappearing, and we are losing the threads of their lives, first as migrants, then as settlers, and finally as Australian Greek communities. Pre-war populations history has been well documented, but there is a significant gap in post-war history, which saw the largest wave of migration from Greece to Australia. Associate Professor Doumanis goes on to say that as pivotal as the contribution of the Greek population has been to what modern Australia is, Australian historians don't really know what to make of it. Therefore, it doesn't really feature in Australian history writing, which is quite a sad story. Greece itself doesn't necessarily consider us as part of its history, and it's upon us to show the part we play in Australian history and how we are a significant part of the diaspora experience. And so it is up to the Greek community in Australia to tell its stories. This is what Hellenic Dreaming does, through oral interviews, personal essays, short stories, historical prose, photography, poems and memoirs, capturing a chorus of pasts that matter in the present. The contributors range from first to third generation Australians and from young to old, with different values, hopes, wants and dreams. In his review of Hellenic Dreaming, entitled The Past, Present and Future, Voicing Greek Australian Dreaming, Professor Augoustinos stated, "As an immigrant in the United States for 40 long years, I regularly reflect on the significance of living between two cultures. As a person who makes a living teaching and writing about diaspora, I join fellow diaspora travellers in striving to understand how living between two cultures shapes lives also. And also how individuals and institutions negotiate their affiliations with two worlds. How are memories transmitted or not intergenerationally? I ask who represents this experience, how and to what end?" So lots of significant questions there. In another great Neos Cosmos article, Dr. Adonis Pavlou wrote that storytelling is precious. It is an opportunity to pause and critically reflect, to recognise a more measured sense in our words. In Hellenic Dreaming, Greek-Australian stories, an assortment of diasporic chroniclers gives fresh meaning to diasporic storying. It goes on to say, Hellenic Dreaming harnesses a collective desire to reflect and share. Moving away from feel-good accounts of Greeks personifying a successful chapter in the overall multicultural story, we are invited to traverse an arc of diasporic experience and expression. It brings together an assembly of voices that call out diverse directions that chart the vicissitudes of Greek-Australian life. Dated traditions and misplaced assumptions, traumatic historical events, and returning to past homelands, friendships and feminism are all tapped into. Of course, as we spoke of before, Hellenic Dreaming also deals with the difficult experiences of discrimination. The questions, are Greeks white, is asked. The fact that there are many Greek diasporas and microcultures, the architectural touches that Greeks have made to suburban life, among other things. I can only imagine the amount of work in producing this book. It took a long time and a lot of persistence, I can understand. 3 years, wow. We should appreciate Dr. Vatsikopoulos' dedication and diligence in this regard. It required reaching out to many people and asking them to contribute, following up with them countlessly, I'm sure, and getting their contributions, structuring and editing to make this wonderful and coherent book, which is no easy feat. We should also acknowledge each of the contributors for putting themselves out there. They give voice to the stories of many people who no doubt had similar experiences and stories, but did not have the opportunity to tell them. I therefore thank Dr. Helen Vatsikopoulos for showing such intellectual and creative courage and leadership in seeing the importance of Hellenic dreaming for us all now and for the future generations, as Mariah so beautifully was describing as well. And also to Kay Pavlou and Emerita Professor Martha Augoustinos for talking about their first-hand experiences and stories. I highly recommend you obtain a copy of the book and enjoy a great read. Also, in connection with this launch, the Greek Museum of Adelaide conducted the high school short story competition. So I understand the idea for the competition was born from an early discussion with Dr. Vatsikopoulos about the Greek Museum hosting the launch and thinking about how the next generation might write or voice their own stories. And we're just delighted to hear about the contribution that Mariah's story will make in the Greek text. That's just incredible. So congratulations to all who are making that happen. On behalf of the Hellenic Studies Foundation, I would like to add my heartfelt congratulations to all the winners and take this opportunity to thank all the students as well who participated, thank their parents, teachers, schools, principals for supporting and encouraging the participation. Finally, I would like to congratulate the Greek Museum for hosting the South Australian launch of Hellenic Dreaming and for undertaking the high school short story competition with the support, of course, of the foundation. The effort required to conduct a statewide competition should not be underestimated. Again, I thank the museum for inviting the Hellenic Studies Foundation to give this vote of thanks, and I've truly enjoyed this opportunity to be with you and to hear all the beautiful the outcomes of such an incredible book. So thank you and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Well, thank you for that. I think we should have another round of applause for everybody who we do have some gifts for speakers, but we'll line it up shortly. I'd like to thank all our speakers again, and all our judges, all the students, their families, the schools, the teachers. It's been, as I said earlier on, it's been a great honour to host this event, the launch of Hellenic Dreaming. If you want to get a copy, we will be at this table and we will tell you how to do it. I think we just want to finally thank our sponsors, Hellenic Studies Foundation, the City of West Torrens, Festival Hellenika, OEEGA, that help make this event possible. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. This is the end of our formal proceedings, so please have a look at the museum's current exhibition on display, Greek costume, tradition and life, and to mingle, catch up and enjoy the refreshments. And can the prize winners and Helen and Martha and Kay come to, we'll have some photos here, and judges as well. So thank you.